Fine. So what I hopefully I know it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot of sources, but trying to go through them relatively quickly to get to the key points in terms of the halacha. What I wanted to try and do in this whole area was take a sugya, take a topic which really stretches over many daf. It's a month still been going on. It goes through the whole of these parakim in Eruvin. Perek Hadar, Perek Chalo, and it goes through the sugya is the whole way through. It's trying to understand what Schiras Rishus is, and how it works in various contemporary settings. That's the idea. So we started with the Mishnah Perek Hadar, which you probably had a chance to see, which basically tells you the basic halachas of Hadorim or Akum b'chotzer, or Misha Einamoid be'erev, Hareza Oser Olav. So in a situation where there is not possible to perform Erev Chatzeros, why? Because Erev Chatzeros, the whole idea of an Erev Chatzeros is only between two Jews, right? Those who subscribe to the whole system, and therefore it's not possible to do an Erev Chatzeros. So, for example, you're living with the guy. So, what do? Hareza Oser Olav. The Tanna Kama holds that the presence of the non-Jew there will prevent you carrying at all, even if you make an Erev with your Jewish neighbor. And therefore, what you have to do is you have to rent the rishus from him. Rashi says that she is and rishus yesh lebechotzer, right? Till you rent the rishus. We'll come on to how that works in a second. The Rabbi Yaakov says, and halacha is like a Rabbi Yaakov. He says, "La'olam oser achu shnei Yisraelim oshim zelzer." It only becomes also when you have two Yisraelim who asa on each other. So the only time when you have to even consider the concept of schiras rishus, says Rabbi ben Yaakov, where you have to come on to renting the property of the non-Jew, is only in a situation when you have a minimum of two Jews and one non-Jew. That's Rabbi ben Yaakov's view, and that's how we paskin la halacha. The Shulchan Aruch says, we'll leave the rest of the mission in a moment. The Shulchan Aruch says, Hadorim akum b'chotzer eino oser olav. This is the beginning of Shimpei Beis Sif Aleph. One who lives with a non-Jew in a chotzer eino oser olav. He doesn't have any effect on the Erev that you want to make with your Jewish neighbors, until you have two Yisraelim living in two houses, and they usher one on the other. Also, then the non-Jew forbids you to carry unless you rent the rishus from him. But it doesn't help that he simply is mevatel his rishus. That's another possibility that works with Yisraelim, the idea of being mevatel rishus. You can simply nullify the rishus, your rights in the chotzer. That doesn't help here. They have to rent his property from him. By the way, the reason why you don't hear very much about bittul rishus is because it doesn't. Even though it works, you have a group of people, and one of them can be nullified their domain to the other, so that he can then carry. But it's not a great solution because it means that they can't. If you're mevatel your rishus, it means you're stuck. So that's why you don't hear very much about this method of bittul rishus, because it's a great solution if you want to have all the benefits and leave no benefits for your neighbor. So that's why we don't usually use bittul rishus that much. It does come in the Gemara in various contexts, but it's not that in a practical sense. It's not that it doesn't help that much. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, what is going on here with this difference between one Jew one Jew or two Jews together with the non-Jew? Mishnah Berurah says, Eino oselav de me'ikar adin sifkot aleph diras akum eino chashuva dira. Mikar adin, according to the strict letter of the law, the diras hakum is not considered to be a dira at all. It's not a dwelling place. It's not significant. It was a gezeras chazal in order to make sure that you don't associate, that one doesn't associate with him and learn from his actions. And therefore they only made their gezerah, like many other gezeras of Chazal, it's only made in a common context. In a situation where there are many Yisraelim there, but not when there's one house. Why? Because in those days they were suspect over bloodshed. It was therefore unusual to find a situation where one Jew was living with a group of non-Jews. So that was the scenario. That was the scenario. That's why Chazal didn't apply their gezerah in that case. It was only in a normal situation. So okay, let's just skip a few more Mishnah Berurahs here. Oster Zalzeh means that they will have to, or when they're Ostrom Zalzeh, yeah, when you have meaning independently of the non-Jew, they prohibit each other carrying in the chotzer. That's what Ostrom Zalzeh means. Because you have two Jews living and sharing a shared space, a chotzer or a stairwell or whatever it is, they have to make an eruv. That's what it means, Ostrom Zalzeh. They forbid each other to carry in the shared communal space until they make an eruv. Right? So in that scenario, until they make the eruv, the default position is exactly that they will, neither of them will be able to carry in that shared space. The presence of the akum, what that does is it injects another problem. It doesn't mean that they don't have to make an eruv as well. It's just that you have to also perform this procedure of schiras rishus in order to remove him from the picture. Okay? So two Jews and one non-Jew. You have.
I get what I'm trying to struggle is surely why is it that they always say on set? In other words, you can't carry from just say what do you do with whether someone else is there in restriction?
No, but we're talking about a place which is if you were the only Jew there, okay, and you have then it's your property, exactly. So that's right. So it's the presence of the two separate houses that make the place that prevent each other carrying in that place. That's what it means. Ostrom zeh al zeh. No. It's their presence, their very physical presence. The fact that it's a shared communal space. No, do you understand? Yeah.
Because Chazal was you can't carry from what belongs to me to what belongs to us. That's right. It belongs to us.
Yeah.
The two people are going to belong to us. I can't go from mine to ours.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So the if you look at Sifkot and Hay, the Mishnah Berurah says, why is it that Bittul Rishus doesn't help? Why can't you just say, okay, you get him to say that as is the case with Mishnah Berurah Yisrael Eruvin b'nei achotzer. If you have a situation where one Jew didn't make an eruv with the others, he just mevatel rishusay. He just nullifies his rights in the chotzer, and that means everyone else can carry. He says, the whole purpose was they didn't want a situation where you have the mixing and the intermingling between the Jewish and non-Jewish neighbors. That was the whole concern. And that's why they said there's no takana until you have to rent. Why? The Gentile is not going to want to rent out his property. Why not? And the Gemara explains because they were worried about kishuf, that some sort of hocus pocus. Why are you getting me to rent out my property to you? All this sort of stuff is going on. They're not going to want to do it. Therefore, the Jew will want to distance himself from living with him so that he's not prevented from carrying. And therefore, that is why Chazal instituted that you have to rent the property from him. But so that's okay. So is that clear? So we're talking about so a situation we have two Jews and one non-Jew. You're going to have to do two things. You're going to have to do eruv chatzeros, the Jews, and you're also going to have to do schiras rishus. You're going to have to rent the Gentiles' property. Simple and straightforward. But what you notice if you move on to the and I quoted the Gemara in Daf Pei Amud Aleph, the little story which is in today's Daf. I really brought it because I thought it was nice to quote something from today's Daf. But basically, there you see it's just one example of how lenient the whole idea of schiras rishus is. This is where you need this to understand the whole piece of schiras rishus and the pieces and the steps that come after this, right? So you have the story there of Ahu Truzina, this non-Jewish, what was it, like a non-Jewish arms dealer, smuggler. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Right. Anyway, he doesn't want to do it. So they asked him, well, let's just rent from his wife. A person person's wife can make an eruv shlomo daito against his will, and they can even do this here in terms of renting from the non-Jew, right? They can rent from his wife even if he doesn't know about it, right? And you have there's three examples of this. There are others as well, but if you look in the Mishnah Berurah in Shulchan Aruch Shim Pei Beis Sif Dalad, you have the what does it say there? Just very brief examples. Doesn't need to say what he's doing it for. He can just rent from him. You don't need to write anything about it at all. You have the next example is even less than a shove pruta. The reason the Shura says for that is because that's considered to be it's got a significance in a monetary sense when it comes to non-Jews, because of the rules of the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach. And then you have also Sif Yud Aleph, which is the one that was relevant here. Avami Ishta, you can rent from his wife. Omis Schiro Lekito. Schiro Lekito are the people who work for him. His socher is the one who's hired to work for him for the whole year. Lekito is someone who's a seasonal worker. You hire he's working for you just for the summer months, whatever. Sochim, you can rent from them as well. Aval Bishu Moicha, even though he's objecting. Yeah. And you can even the Ramah adds Schiro shel Schiro Lekito Balabais, Schiro shel Balabais Ba'atzmai. So the socher of the Schiro Lekito of the Balabais. So it's two steps removed here. Is all okay as well, right? So you see from all of this that there are huge leniencies here in terms of the way the schiros can operate. There's a critical line here, the one line Mishnah Berurah on Sif Dalad, where the Mishnah Berurah says the dai b'schiros chalusha. It's enough with a weak schiros, v'loy bo'in on schiros bria. We don't need a strong form of schiros. We don't need anything that would stand up in a court of law. We don't need that. It just need something of weak significance. Now the Chazon Ish explains the reason for this, and that is that he actually proves there's other examples. He gives another example where you have a situation where there are a group of Jews and a non-Jew who are living in an open area of Hefk. It's completely ownerless or whatever. There is a problem. They're there for Shabbos in this temporary campsite or whatever. So the non-Jew is going to prevent them. Their area is not going to work because of the presence of the non-Jew. So what they have to do is they have to rent from him his reshus. And it's how can that work? They don't own the land, they don't own the property. It belongs to someone else. Or it's hefka. The whole it's a whole setup where the whole rental from him shouldn't work at all, and yet it still does. So he says it must be that it's shetakonas chachomim hi lasos maises chirus. It is takonas chachomim. It was takonas chachomim just to do an action of chirus, almost like it's symbolic in nature. That's also, by the way, the Mishnah Berurah, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, it's a Gemara as well, that you can even be done on Shabbos. If you forgot to do it before Shabbos, obviously you wouldn't be able to give money for it, but you'll be able to do the schirus in a way that would be allowed even on Shabbos. Well, you're not really taking anything over. No, well, yeah, you'd make an agreement. I suppose I imagine you make a sort of. A kinyan. The whole point is Domin Mekach on Memka should be not allowed on Shabbos. It's I'm not sure where it is. Where is the what Shabbos? Pardon? The Ramah on Hay. That's right. Yeah, there you go. No, because you would have made an error before Shabbos. That's why. That's how you can carry it. It seems to be that you're allowed to take it though for that purpose. Yeah, exactly. It's very unusual. It's very strange. Yeah. There's no machal. Yeah. There you go. It's very strange, isn't it? You give it to him. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you get around the fact that the non-Jew, your friend, the non-Jew, doesn't own or have any rights? You say that even though he's...
Because effectively we're saying that that's why the reason is so important. The reason for this schirus, right, was to discourage, was to simply a takonas chazal to discourage living together, and therefore, although Chazal gave it the appearance of a proper schirus, it isn't really a proper schirus. It doesn't have to fulfill all the rules that fully fledged rental agreements would need to. That's how the Chazon Ish explains it. He says basically that the Chazal instituted for the reason of the discouraging of living together, to do an action of schirus, so to go through the motions of a schirus in that form, to as if you're taking over some sort of rights in the property of the nochri. So the reason why that's so important is because, as we'll see, there are all sorts of scenarios where schirus is very, very difficult to achieve when you come onto major cities and everything else. So to understand the background and the basis to how schirus works is very important. There's another point here as well, and that is something which may have gone through your minds as well, and that is, how do you apply this to nowadays, right? How do you apply we understand Chazal because they're worried about shvichas domim and they're worried all these. How does that apply nowadays? And in fact, it's a machlokas achronim. There's a tshuva of the Ginas Verodim who says that nowadays the whole reason, the whole takana of schirus isn't applicable. Why? Because the whole point was to prevent living amongst, to keep separate, not to live together amongst Jews and non-Jews. And he says nowadays we live together anyway. Our parnosa is entirely from them. He said that's how the way he describes it, right? We don't have, he says, right? We don't have any our inherited, our own separate areas. It doesn't work like that. At least when we live with that, at least we'll find some favor in their eyes. At least basically he says the whole gezeras chachomim doesn't seem to apply. And therefore he says that you can be makel with this takana where there are other tzodim lahaka, where there are other grounds to be makel. Now that's a very big machlokas. Others disagree. The Chasam Sofer says absolutely not. The takana still applies completely, even if the reason doesn't apply anymore. You can't be mata any erev without schirus. But what the contemporary person say, like Rav Wosner Shevet HaLevi, he says that where you have situations and circumstances where there are other grounds to be made. An example he gives is where you have a Machal Shabbos Lahachis, right? So we didn't really deal with Machal Shabbos, but that's a whole separate sugya about how that works. We won't have time to go into it, but in a nutshell, when you have a situation of Machal Shabbos B'far Hesia, there is a central doubt as to whether Erev Chatzeris works, or it would seem Schirus Rishus. This was the whole thing with the Stoki, the end of the mission and everything else. How does that work? To cut a long story short, there are doubts over for example, there's a whole question of Tinuk Shenishba, what's called Machal Shabbos B'far Hesia, the public desecration of Shabbos, what's called Lahak. All these problems. What it means in a nutshell is in making an Erev together with where there are non-observant people in the picture, we generally do both. We do both Erev Chatzeris and Schirus Rishus, and that covers us in both directions, okay? But the example that Rav Wosner gives is, let's say you have a Machal Shabbos Lahachis, to spite, who doesn't want to be Moskei's domain. He says, no, I don't want you doing an Erev, and I refuse to rent my property to you, right? So Machal Shabbos B'far Hesia would seem to be, as I said, there is this possibility that you would need to schirus, and he says no. So on that, Rav Wosner says, in such a situation, you can rely on this Ginas Verodim. If the guy point blank refuses, and there's no way of renting from his hired hand or whatever, is any other ways of getting around. So, okay, this is very important. Okay. No. That's the chiddush of Rav Wosner. You've got no choice. He seems to say that you could rely on the Ginas Verodim, who says to not even not do anything with him. That's what he says. Yeah, that's what he says.
Can the Rav repeat the questions when they come through?
Sorry, the question was, that means you're not doing anything at all. That means you're not doing anything at all. It could be. The question was, you're not doing any, are you not? Is Rav Wosner saying you don't do anything at all with him? You're not anything at all, right? It could be that he's not. It's probably a whole long tshuva about it. It's brought down here I haven't seen the tshuva inside. Let's bring it down here on the note in the Dirshu notes on the Mishnah Berurah here, right? So it could be because it's a Machal Shabbos. So maybe maybe there is a doubt as to whether the Erev works. It's not clear exactly what the setting is that Rav Wosner says that, right? But he gives grounds to be makel even in a situation where there is an individual who point blank refuses to be part of it, and there's no other way of being, you can't do Schiras Rishus, to rely and use that Ginas Verodim, who argues that really the whole takana shouldn't apply nowadays at all, because the whole takana was to keep us separate and we're all mixed anyway. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying la halacha, this throws Schiras Rishus out the window. It doesn't. Yes, it doesn't. But it is an important point that the poskim bring when they consider complicated shilas of Schiras Rishus. That's what. Yeah. That's why it's important. We'll come back to it hopefully shortly. When it comes to some of the more practical applications of these halachos, so we have the question of apartment buildings and hotels. I referenced here a Gemara in Samachei Omid Beis. So there's a story. It's again a short Gemara. Reish Lakish v'Talmidei. Reish Lakish v'Talmidei Rabbi Chanina. Right, Samachei Omid Beis. Reish Lakish and the Talmidim Rabbi Chanina. Iklu lahu punduk. They visited a certain inn. V'lo yav soicher v'havo maskir. And there wasn't a soicher, there wasn't the rentor, but there was the person who the maskir, so the person, basically the landlord, not the tenant, right? On they said, Ma'ola mega mene, can we do schiras reshus from the landlord? Where he can't remove them, we don't have a question, right? You can't remove the tenant. I don't have a question. Obviously, we can't rent from him. The shaila is where the maskir, the landlord, has the ability to remove the tenant, then what's the law? Since he can remove him, we can rent from him because he still retains the central ownership of the property. Perhaps at the end of the day, he hasn't removed him yet. And because he hasn't removed him yet, you have to go to the person who's currently owning the property, in other words, the tenant, right? Reish Lakish said to them, Nisko, let's rent from him. Let's rent from the maskir, because that's the only option we have. We only have the landlord here. The tenant's not here. We have no choice. Let's go to him. When we go to our Rabbi Seinu Shebadorim in the south, we'll ask them, did we do the right thing? Did we do the right thing? So they were relying, as Rashi says, on Sofik Devrei Mahaka. It was a Sofik Rabbanon, and therefore they were Meiko. Also, Shiloh Rabbi Efes, they went out to Rabbi Omer, said to them, your first season Shesachartim. They were relieved to hear that you did a good job, you did the right thing, that you rented from the maskir, from the landlord. Now, obviously, this is going to be very relevant to situations which become more complex than the simple case of the two Jewish families and the one non-Jewish family. That's the simple setup we've discussed until now. The question now is, what do you do when things become more complicated? Yeah. Go on.
The landlord.
Yeah.
The landlord is the ultimate owner.
Yeah. Okay.
He's rented it out to, let's say, the landlord. The innkeeper's not around, but the landlord happens to be there.
Whatever situation, the person who's currently living there is not there, right? Right. But the landlord is around. The
landlord owns the land.
He does. He owns it. Yes. But if you remember what the reason for the takana was, the whole reason for the takana was because it seems to be relevant to the person who's living there at the time, right? So the question is it good enough to rent from the landlord? And the answer given is that it is, right? But if you look at the way the Gemara phrased it, it was where he can't remove him. Then there's no question you can't, right? The only question was where he can remove him, so he retains that level of control. So let's see how the Shulchan Aruch brings this down. Shin Pei, where is it? Shin Pei Beis at Yudches. So Shin Pei Beis Yudches, he says like this: if you have one non-Jew who rented out his property to another one, to another non-Jew, if he retains any hold in the house, he's got the ability to leave there any kalim at all, any vessels, any implements of his own. They're allowed to rent from him. If he has got no tfisa, he doesn't have retain any ownership, Then he's not able to put anything of his own there. If the maskir, the landlord, can remove the tenant during the time frame if he wants to, they're allowed to rent from him. And if not, it doesn't help unless they rent from the soicher, from the tenant himself. So Hagos says, someone else who's got some other something else, some other hold on, literally a tfisa on the house. He's got some holding in the house, something that he owns that he's got permission to keep there. They're allowed to rent from him because it's no worse than someone who is working for the owner. Remember, someone who's working for the owner, we mentioned that before, we call schiro lekito, you can rent from them as well, right? So in other words, what we're saying here is there's two possible scenarios where you can rent from from someone who is an owner of, let's say, a whole complex of apartments. One is where he's got the ability to kick people out. Yeah, I should say apartments or hotels. So what hotels as well, right? Well, the ability to move people around or move people out. And the other one is if he's got what we call a tfiso babayis. He's got something in the property that he retains control over. That's the key point. The key point is control. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, even if he hasn't put anything there, but he's got permission to do so. And the reason is, Vatam, it's no worse than schiroi or lekitoi. If he's got permission to use to have some use in the house, you can rent from him. So that's the same idea. This masker as well. If he's got the ability to use the house in some way, the landlord, then you can rent from the landlord. What's the problem? Now, okay, so then he explains about this business of being able to remove him. Yeah. You just see there's anything else they want to bring. Okay, fine. Yeah, and he says at the end as well, as well, when it comes to a tfisa in the house, it's good enough as well if he's got permission to leave something there, even if he hasn't left it there yet. Okay, so that's the idea. Now the source for tfisa babayis is on the Mishnah Pehei based on the Gemara Peivavam and Aleph, which we haven't yet got to. Peivavam and Aleph, which we haven't yet got to in Daf Yomi. It's in a few days' time. There's a Mishnah. Let's just briefly look at this. The Mishnah is on Pehei Amud Beis. We don't have to do the whole Mishnah. We simply do the last line. You see that Pehei Amud Beis? Yeah. The last line is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im yesham tfisas yad shel bal habayis. If there is a tfisas yad of the bal habayis, of the owner, then he's got some permission to leave his property there. Then eino oser. He doesn't cause it to be forbidden. In other words, the whole chotzer, everything is considered to be as if he lives in the house. Okay, it's as if he owns it. It's as if he belongs to him. So with this, we're bringing in another aspect of tfisa babayis. Let's be clear. Until now, what we saw was, we mentioned this idea of a maskir, someone who's a landlord, right, who is letting out the property to someone else, but retains some level of tfisa babayis, some holding, some ownership of the property. Okay, if the balabayis, so this is the source for this. He's got an ownership of the house. He can leave his kalim there. He can leave his influence there. That makes it his. We'll come on to the distinction in a second, but just look at the Gemara for it. The Gemara here, Peivav Amud Aleph. Rabbi Bar Chana Omar, so it's about 5 lines before the Mishnah. Rabbi Bar Chana said, could go in Yosei Shel Macharesha. Yosei Shel Macharesha is something very small, it's like the handle of a plow. Even that alone is considered to be tfisas yad. Omar of Nachman Tanat Debei Shmuel, Dova Hanitzel the Shabbos Oser, something which can be taken on Shabbos. That's not called, something that can be carried on Shabbos, it's not muktzah, right? That's not called a tfisas yad, right? And therefore it ussers. That's not enough of a hand. Why? Because the guy who's living there currently, can just chuck it out, can just throw it out. It's not a permanent enough a holding and a possession of the property that the owner has, the landlord, right? Because he can just get rid of it. He can just throw it out because it's movable on Shabbos. It's not mukta. But dover she'eino nitul b'Shabbos, if there's something in the property which can't be moved on Shabbos, let's say there's a fridge, yeah, which can't be moved on Shabbos, right? Then that's a tfisas yad in the house, and there's nothing he can do. Because there's nothing that cannot be removed. It cannot be removed from the house. Now, on the basis of these Gemaras, Rav Moshe, who is the main source of he is the main source certainly of the lenient opinions when it comes to hotels and also apartments as well. He paskins the following way. Actually, there's one more, isn't there? One more source on the sheet, isn't there? We have to see first. Shin Ayin. Shin, where is that? Yeah, let's see this inside. Shin Ayin, Sif base. Shin Ayin, Sif base. Yeah, here. Balabayas, Yeshloi Harbe Botim B'chotzer. A Balabayas who has many houses in a chotzer, okay? Shilon or Skiron La'acherem. He's Shilon or Skiron. He's lent them out or he's rented them out to others. The Yeshloi B'chol Echod Mehem, and in each of them he's got Dvorim She'enom Nitolim B'Shabbos, things that are not moved on Shabbos. Machmas Kovdon Machmas Isur, because they're either very heavy. Right, this is Shin Aleph, the Shin Ayin. Sorry, yeah, Shin Ayin. It's at the beginning, or because of Isser, so they're mukta, or because they're just too heavy, like a massive cupboard or whatever. Pardon? Yeah, Shem Devorim She'ostel Lataltam Afilo Tzarech Makom, things you can't move even if you need a place. Ein Hadorim Bohem Osrim Olov. The people living there, all the other people living in that complex, that apartment complex or whatever it is, they don't answer on him. Lefishanasu Kulom. They all become like guests, like his guests. They can also take out from their houses to the chotzer, even though they haven't put an eruv down. Okay, but then if he says the houses don't belong to him, that's something else. The Ramah says some say this is only when there are no other people living in chotzer apart from them. But if there are others, that's something. Then it's a different situation. So the Mishnah Berurah says. Which ones did I point out? 7 to 11. Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at Sivkot and Yud in the Mishnah Berurah, Shanasu Kulam Ka'archim, Kevan Shalo Silek Atzmo Mebotim Elam Kol Chol. He hasn't removed himself from these houses completely. As long as his items are there, because if they're not there, that doesn't help. He's got to actually have the items there. Now, what this means is it's something different to the scenario before. Before we were talking about renting from a landlord, schirus reshus from a landlord. Okay, we said like this, that whenever a has objects, right, in apartments or, for example, presumably in hotel rooms as well, yeah, that the tenants cannot move without permission, like fridges or whatever. That's just not, they've got no right over that sort of thing. So then all you need to do is a schiras reshus with the landlord. That's what we saw before, yeah? Schiras reshus with the landlord is enough because the landlord has a tfisas yad. We said there are one of two things you need. Either a tfisas yad, he's got things inside the properties, right, that he retains jurisdiction over. That's one way. Or he can move people out at will, which is less common probably, right? He can just move them out during the period of rental, right? It's probably less likely. Ramosha holds that this works even if the soicher has rented the right to use the objects, right? Even if he's rented the right to use them, that still works. It still works. Okay? Why? Because essentially, because he still owns the objects, he's got some authority over the whole thing, over all the apartments, for example. So you can do this umbrella skiros reshus on the whole area. But there is another case. There is another case that, and that is when you have, and that's what this sif is talking about, when you have a situation, and by the way, there's an excellent book which is a sefer called The Contemporary Eruv, which contains all this very, very clearly and concisely brings down all the in a way that's sort of, it's a very complicated sugya, very complicated talk, but at least it brings it down in a way that is more understandable. He says like this, that if you have a situation where the landlord not only does he have some tvisas yad, he's got like fridges that he's put in all the apartments, right? But he's also living in one of the properties. That's the case of Shin Ayin. He's actually living there as well. Then you don't even need Schiros Rishus. You don't need anything. You don't need an Eruv and you don't need Schiros Rishus, because like the Mishloach Marach says, they're like his guests. They're like all the guests. Right? They're like all the guests of this landlord. They're all unified. According to Reb Moshe, it comes out if the owner of the hotel or his agent or an employee resides in the hotel, then what happens is everyone's unified through the Tvisas Yad. You wouldn't need Eruv Chatzeros and you wouldn't need Schiros Rishus as well. Nothing would be necessary according to Reb Moshe. It's important to understand that I mean, he brings here in the notes, interestingly, that I've heard from several reliable sources that Moshe did not even require that the landlord or his employee reside in the building in order that Tvisas Yad should suffice. The halachically, the landlord is considered to reside in all the apartments, even if he doesn't physically live in one of the apartments, or there are no employees of the hotel actually living in the hotel, right? And he says there's a prevalent practice around this tradition. He says I haven't been able to find it in any of Rav Moshe's tshuvas. If you look anywhere when it comes to hotels, Rav Moshe is quoted as the one being makel that allows you to carry in a hotel, yeah, even if there's no, you haven't done anything. Based on this whole idea, right? The whole idea of there's a tvisas yad, the hotel retain ownership of, let's say, all of the mini bars, in every room or whatever it is, and that's good. But there are major poskim or chaylik with this. The Dvar Avram is one of the major poskim was quoted. Who was the Kovner of? He was quoted as one of the major poskim who are chaylik with this. The Chazon Ish as well also disagrees. But this is the famous machlokas between Rav Moshe and Dvar Avram when it comes to hotels. Yeah.
But there must be in every room.
What?
There's one room.
Yeah, which normally there is in a hotel. Generally there is, right? If you in a hotel, yeah, there's going to be this form of tvisas yad, right? They're going to be, yeah, exactly. There's loads of stuff, right? There's going to exactly. Yeah, that's right. Even if you've rented the right to use it, exactly. Rav Moshe is a big chiddush, but it's all based on this idea. As I said, there are different, maybe a different person with different situations. It's only going to be you have to remember that it's not a shaila at all if you're the only Jew in the hotel. Yeah, if you're in the middle, if you go to Dubai and you're the only Jew in the hotel, then the whole takana doesn't apply anyway. What? Not anymore. Now it will. Yeah, no, Dubai's not a good example anymore, is it? Right? Anyway, you're in Saudi Arabia, whatever it is. So you're somewhere where there's only, you're the only Jew. Then you don't need Schiros Rishus anyway. We said that right at the beginning, right? One Jew with multiple non-Jews, Chazal were never masakin Schiros Rishus at all. Okay, if you are two Jewish families in a hotel with multiple non-Jews, right? Then yeah, there's the opinion of Rav Moshe, who presume it would seem is certainly quoted as holding you don't need anything. But if you want to be Makayim, the poskim or cholek, so then you do Schiros Rishus through these very simple manner. A simple manner on Erev Shabbos, you would go to the hotel, the owner of the hotel, and you would give them you would organize a Schiros Rishus. What I was discussing with my chavrusa was he had a shaila of this nature for himself recently, and he actually received a psak that there's another way of doing it which is even more straightforward. Because you might sort of feel, well, if you go up to the receptionist, according to what we've seen, it should be okay. So he's the agent or the employee of of the hotel. Presumably that would be okay as well, right? But either you could contract a very simple Schiros Rishus, you explain we have this Jewish thing, and if I can give you this, and I'm just going to rent from you the hotel, whatever, okay. But if you don't want to do that, there is another way that the post can say you can do it, and that is you can give her a key, him or her a key. The key that your key, you can buy a key, a padlock and a key, even if its key doesn't have very much a functional use, doesn't have to be the key to your room. You give her the key, and then what happens is if I'm remembering this correctly, then they become a schiro lokito. They become the socher. They're guarding they're looking after the key for you. So that alone means that you will be okay, because that they become your socher. They're working for you now by looking after the key. What? Yeah, but they're working for you. You want them to work for you, and that avoids the problem of even needing to do a schiras rishus.
The Mishnah case of schira lokito is when you're coming into a flat.
No, but if you make someone your schira lokito, that means it's all working for you.
Where does it say that?
It's another form of schira. I know schira lokito is where they're renting from. Your thing is schira, you can rent from them. But if I'm understanding it correctly, I think what happens is that if you turn it the situation where the hotel is working for you, I know it sounds very strange, but the hotel is now working for you, so you avoid the need to do anything else because they're your employee. I'm not sure exactly, but it's another application of schira lokito. It's another simple way of doing it, right? Again, any practical shilas always ask a shilah, right? But this is what it was new. It was new. That whole idea was new to me. It's just an interesting way of doing it. But even the way the schira rishus alone is very simple to do, right? I'm conscious of the time. I just want to cover very briefly in just a couple of minutes about the city Eruvin. Yeah. Yeah. So then you're going to have, well, that depends again. You might have to do schira rishus anyway, depending if they're from or not from. You might have to cover yourself both ways anyway. Let's say it's a from hotel. So then what? Well, you're going to still have an eruv chatzeros issue, right? You're still going to have to do an eruv chatzeros in some way. Hopefully, they would have done it anyway. Meaning, you're going to either need eruv chatzeros. Everyone's from eruv chatzeros only. Everyone's from and everyone's Jewish. Eruv chatzeros only.
There are lots of non-Jews there.
Yeah, but they're in the hotel. Doesn't matter. You're talking about the hotel, right? No. You would still need. Hold on a second. No, because if they're there, the schiras rishus, they're sochrim. But we said you can. You said you can do it from the masjid. So then, hold on a minute. How would that work? Mahir, I brings it here. Hold on a second. Yeah, malon shabalav Yehudi masjid orchim charein chadorim sheish beim mitzvos shulchan. The owners here. Yeah. They say no, you have to make an eruv. That's not called fisas yad. The fact that the Jewish owners have stuff in the rooms. He said that according to the Dvar of Rome, the machmirim, it doesn't help, and therefore you have to make an eruv. But you won't need any. Why would you need schiras rishus? Trying to work through this. Why wouldn't they? Because the maskir would be enough. No.
No, it's only when they're not there.
But the seich, yeah.
The problem is we don't have shepherd. If you're not signing from the fact that they work, then obviously it's become a problem. Right.
If you're asking why should the eruv chatzeros should be enough? The eruv alone should be enough. You're saying it shouldn't be enough because they own their own rooms, they've rented their rooms, and therefore they should be a problem.
Is this just a heter in the message by the non-Jewish owner? Or is it by that heter to the Jewish
It seems to be, yeah, it seems to be that when you can go directly to the maskir, I'm not entirely sure, but it could be that you can just do an eruv with the maskir and that's enough, as the same way you can do schiras alone with the maskir. But I'm not sure. Again, these are, we're touching on all the it's incredibly complicated. Very, very briefly, just to touch on the city Eruvin, there is a Mishnah in Gimel, but you don't need to do that Mishnah. That basically just says that it's a question of scaling up. There's rules that apply to eruv chatzeros, apply to shitufim avoos, which is the larger scale of when you make a shituf and a mavui is basically joining together chatzeros and a mavui. So you just scale everything up, but the same principles apply. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch very briefly, Shin Sadi Aleph. Shin Sadi Aleph. I apologize for jumping around so much. It was just the idea was to try and cover as much as possible to get some idea of the halacha l'maisa from the daf. That's really what we're trying to achieve because there's so much of this. So the Shin Sadi Aleph, Sif, where is it? Base Shin Sadi Aleph 3. It's Shin Sadi Aleph. Okay. That's right. Here we go. Yeah. Here we go. So he says here, basically the Shulchan Aruch talks about talks about no, it's Aleph, not base. Sorry. He talks about whether it's enough to rent from the Sar Ho'ir. So, yeah, he basically says where the Mechaber finishes off with saying that where the Sar, the officer in charge of the city, or whatever, the guy in charge of the city, where it's all done through him, then you can rent from him, or Mischiro Lakito, the people under him, okay, because he can put his people and the people, whatever it was, a Klimul Chamto in all the houses of the city. The Mishnah Berurah, the last Mishnah Berurah, Sifkot Yud Ches, says, according to this, you can rent from the appointee of the king. He can put them wherever he wants. If so, even if his servants, they all work for him, and they're appointed by the king. But he says, the Mishnah, he says, the police. Everything is through them, and even for through the people who work for them, they can do whatever they like through the commands of the king. But he says, he's not happy with using the army. And the question arises nowadays, it's understandable in that context where they really did have the ability to do whatever they wanted. But nowadays, when we make city Eruvin, how can you rent from the authorities of the city? And there is a very, very big discussion about this, how it can possibly work. There are all sorts of issues because nowadays they do not have the same jurisdiction. Okay, when it comes to the communally owned spaces like the roads and everything else, that's easier, but they can't go into your house and take ownership of your house. So how does it help to do a schiros reshus of the whole city, as is done? I have an example here, which I even printed off, which you can see afterwards, from it was done in Manchester, the Whitefield Eruv. There's a document here, Whitefield Eruv, schiros reshus. Schiros, symbolic rental of domain. The sum of £20 was given to Councillor Sharon Briggs, the mayor of Bury. Okay, so how do we do all of this? Big discussion, a big debate about it, which we won't have time to go into. But suffice to say, this is one of the reasons why you need that Ginas Verodim. I mentioned at the beginning. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, for example, is makel to rely on schiros from those who come from the people in charge of the city or whatever, because at the end of the day, they have some ability in times of emergency to control aspects of inside your house. It occurred to me that nowadays perhaps we've been able to prove this through Corona, because they can impose all sorts of rules upon us within our homes. So maybe it does prove that in emergency settings they do have those powers. And together with this whole idea of the Ginas Varadim, which says that Schiros Reshus nowadays the reason doesn't apply, which of course is a fascinating question because there's Chazal in general. So what if the reason doesn't apply? Does it still apply or not? But again, as he himself says, we can use that as a tziruf together with that Ginas Varadim, and these situations. That's how we can be makel. The reality is the minhag is clearly to be makel, and to rent from the local authorities. That's clearly what does take place. There's a lot more to talk about, but it's a little insight into the issues involved. The Jews. Well, the Jews will be covered either through the Erev Chatzeros. Again, the same thing. You're going to cover all types of Jews either through Erev Chatzeros, Schiros Reshus. That's how you always cover yourself. Absolutely, I know. So with Erev Chatzeros, you can say Zachan Adam Shelo B'Fanav, right? It's a zchus. You'd be able to carry as a zchus, right? So it's unless you object, and exactly, and that's why I said Rav Osner says. Again, you come back to this Ginas Varadim. You have a Mumma Lahachis, for example. Machal Shabbos Lahachis. I'm telling you, I'm not being part. Okay, maybe. Yeah, exactly. So again, you're going to have to rely on the nod of Scotia. Well, that's interesting. If I don't know if he can do that. Can a Jew do that from an Erev to remove himself from the Erev Chatzeros again his will? We saw against his will. We can Sochem Adam Shalom Adam Shalom Edaita. That was his wife. If you go against his will, so that's interesting. That's interesting there as well. But but there you are. I mean, the Chaznish, there's other problems. The Chaznish has another issue. The Chaznish says, so how can you switch the? He says, let's say when the Erev is built, it's owned by a Jew, a Shomer Shabbos Jew owns the dwelling, right? So then it's under Erev Chatzeros. Okay. Subsequently, the dwelling is then sold, and a non-Jew acquires it. It's now got to automatically switch to Schiros Reshus without anyone doing anything. and backwards and forwards. And that's where you get, it's very complicated to understand how it works. Lemaisa, it works, but it's not a simple thing. It's not a simple thing. Okay, very good. I apologize for going a few minutes over. Have a very good evening. Okay. Sorry, Jeremy, I heard your voice in my head. No, Chazal, there are lots of principles that feed into Eruvin, right? This whole idea of Skeros Rishos was to prevent intermingling, which means the whole idea of Skeros Rishos is difficult to apply nowadays because we all intermingle anyway, right? And also, the other thing that's feeding into the reason why we do Skeros Rishos on the whole city as well is because if we didn't, people wouldn't be able to carry on Shabbos. There'd be all sorts of,